only Tennessee. And his name is Michael Haycraft. He's a man who has what used to be called multiple personality disorder. It now goes under a euphemism that really says less about his life and his way of viewing the world and his experiences. It's called dissociative identity disorder. And his wife tells me he's not sure how long his sentence is, but he's already served 4 years. And if it were a 10-year sentence and he was to be released after 35%, he's due for release. And yet he has been denied parole for a third time. And now there are new developments in his management, if you will, by the slave system. We do have slavery, by the way, in Tennessee, and it's constitutional. And the only slave owner, the only slavery allowed, the only chattel personal slavery that's allowed in our state is that by the state of people duly convicted for a crime. So slavery is allowed, and slavery is part of the human condition. We just have to admit that there's the sin problem, which enslaves people to vices and wickedness. But we also that manifests itself in slavery of other types: economic slavery, political slavery, and chattel slavery in the kind that was in the Old South. But there's also state slavery, and it is a major industry, by the way. And Beth Haycraft, your husband is Michael, and you are a former prison guard and met Michael and got married. It's a very unusual story, and maybe you can touch on how that happened if we have a few minutes at the end of our chat. What is it with Michael? He is now in confinement with a member of the Vice Lord gang. What is the Vice Lord gang? And who are these people that are a danger, you say, this morning at Nuganomics.com, to your husband, Michael?
Right, David, thank you for letting me have voice again. Actually, he's not housed with the Vice Lord currently. It was a kill-on-sight order that was put on him by the Vice Lords and the Crips while he was at Morgan County Correctional Complex. Michael was transferred further away from our home. We can only believe that was an act of retaliation by Morgan County because I went to the press about the abuse that he was enduring. My husband has 3 Axis 1 diagnoses. I do have his permission to tell his story, and I also have power of attorney. As a mentally ill inmate, he is not getting any kind of quality of care. There are very few people there that want to deal with the mentally ill. A lot of officers do not apparently believe in mental illness. They think that their job is to punish inmates. They don't understand that these people being incarcerated is the punishment. They're adding insult to injury.
Go on.
And when he was transferred to TCIX, is the Tarney Center, that's the abbreviation for that, he was placed in protective custody, as he was in Morgan County. That was because he was denied parole again in April 10th. The parole board has been made aware 3 times of this man's mental health diagnoses, and each and every time, for whatever reason, they have denied him parole. To my understanding of the research that I've done, there is no member of the parole board that has any kind of background to deal with people who have mental illness. They have set Michael up to fail. They mandated that he take therapeutic community before he goes up for parole in April of 2019, except that people in protective custody are not allowed to participate in programs. So we're not sure how that is supposed to transpire.
Well, let me just ask you about that, Beth. Okay, if you're in protective custody, that's not because you've done something wrong, but because there is fear by the administration that someone may do a wrong to you, so you're protected. But as I understand it from Brenda Harmer and Robert Z. Whipple, my correspondents, you are really being punished because you have no access to anything except you get out of your cell for 1 hour per day for exercise, and that's it.
Absolutely. Prisoners that are in maximum custody have more rights than the inmates that are in protective custody.
And they
have no access to the law library. They have no access to inmate advisors, or jailhouse lawyers is what they call them. So these people are stuck.
Just by the way, I did send Beth Haycraft's letter to me, and you can read it today at Nuganomics.com. That's Nuganomics.com, our sponsor. And I sent a copy of that document to Nasa Taylor, who is the spokeswoman for the Department of Corrections in Nashville. And she really promptly wrote back at 7:30 this morning, I will look into this case and provide you with a response when I've had an opportunity to review it. So that's the state's answer. So she did respond to me quickly. So Beth Haycraft, tell us some more about your husband's confinement in this protective custody situation.
Well, when he was transferred from Morgan County to TCIX, he was in a unit that was very close. I mean, they were, I don't even know that they were out. Yeah, they were out 1 hour a day. They did have rec time in an outdoor cage. So at least the cages had telephones. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. So inmates who were unfortunate enough to be placed in a cage that didn't have a telephone, they lost their time. That's the only time that they can call their families. And
paying the fees as they go
to another unit. That was when the issues started with this particular thing. They tried to place him in a cell with a gentleman that he was actually on. I almost got away with it, and I think that was season 3, episode 13. And before they placed Michael in the cell,
I'm not following you. What are you saying?
Are you ready for this?
Beth, you back up. I didn't quite understand what you were saying about season 13. What are you referring to?
Oh, there was a TV series that was called I Almost Got Away with It.
Okay, go ahead.
And so, this is this individual. So if you want to see what this man looked like, he's on there. And the officer, for her to make that comment, are you ready for this? That meant that they understood that the man's behavior was very bizarre. Michael went inside the cell. The other gentleman who is Asian had told Michael, he's like, I cannot cell with anybody.
Meaning, so I cannot be in the same cell with somebody else. Is that what that means? I cannot cell with anybody?
Exactly.
Okay.
And so the officer sent Michael back to the previous housing unit where he was. She said, I don't have any place else to put you. When he was sent back to the previous housing unit, he was told that he couldn't have his property because he refused cell assignment. He didn't refuse cell assignment. They gave him a Class C write-up. When he asked the officer about it, she's like, I didn't do it. So somebody forged her name on that, but she did nothing to fight for Michael. They refused to give him his property, which included his hygiene and religious materials, for 5 days.
So what does that mean? What does hygiene material mean? Is that like toothbrush and wash rag?
Soap, towel, anything.
And religious material, what would that include?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, his Bible and anything like that. He asked them point blank to have his Bible, and they refused. So that's a civil rights violation. So they finally, after 5 days, put him back in the other unit with the same gentleman, and he was there for 2 weeks. And now on the weekend, for whatever reason, they do not get even the 1 hour of recreation. So he was in a cell with a gentleman whose symptoms are consistent with schizophrenia for over 72 hours. Michael said the man talked incessantly. He had some very vulgar comments, attitudes towards women, especially the nurses. He had very bizarre and sexually acting out behavior when he was in the cell by himself. So I think that may be one of the reasons that they put Michael in there with him, because they said that the other gentleman's behavior would calm down if he had a cellie. But Michael's ability to cope with this gentleman, it would test anybody. He couldn't think. He couldn't sleep. He had asked to see mental health multiple times. He was denied.
And what about the dissociative
TDOC?
Tennessee Department of Corrections. Well, backing up just for a second, how in the time your husband was in the cell with this very bizarre man who apparently by rule can't have another cellmate, what was your husband's dissociative identity disorder symptom, or did he have symptoms at the time, or how could you find out about that?
It was more not necessarily he as far as he knew was not switching personalities. It was more triggering the anger response. It was my concern that the extreme stress would cause him to begin switching personalities. He has actually done very well. It's a matter of him keeping focus and journaling so that he doesn't deceive whether he has missing time or not. But it was very irresponsible of TCIX staff to place him in an even more stressed environment. And that had to be done intentionally. All these people have had his diagnosis since he has been incarcerated.
Now, why is your husband in prison, Beth Haycraft, and what was the sentence, and how many different prisons has he been?
Okay, Michael he's an adult survivor of severe child abuse. And the state of Tennessee began to incarcerate him when he was 12. And Michael had no understanding that he had dissociative identity disorder because there's not shared memory between the alternate personalities. So there were times that he would sort of come to himself, as he described it, and he would be in jail, and he had no idea why. And because there was not memory, somebody would say, "Oh, you did this," and he was just like, "Okay." And there was no way that he had to defend himself. So of the charges he has, we don't know how many things that he actually did and how much he was the convenient one to blame, which is what happened to him in 2013 in a Sullivan County Walmart. He was with a group of people that were shoplifting. The police report there did not say that Michael took anything out of the store, and yet the entire group was charged. It was never in court brought up that he had a mental health issue. He did not have adequate representation. The arrest in 2013 made it brought to light a charge from Dyer County, where he's originally from 2006, 2007. Michael had no memory of the charge. And that was for aggravated burglary. What aggravated burglary means is that he went into a residence during daylight. No weapon, no anything like that, but that's what the charges were. He was only supposed to serve 1 year from Dyer County. That's what the court had told him, pay back all the fines. Everything was fulfilled there in 2015. Sullivan, it was when he went up for parole the first time that we found out that the district attorney from Sullivan County had handwritten something that was not presented in court, which was that he was not to be considered for any early release. And so we don't know what happened on that. But even with that, that was a 6-year charge, which shouldn't have happened. The 10-year sentence from Dyer County was supposed to override the 6-year, but 10 years at 35% is 3 years and 5 months, and he's already fulfilled that.
So you're thinking maybe Beth Haycraft, he has a 16-year sentence. You're thinking he has a 16-year sentence, and that's why he's still in the prison system?
No, it was to run. Concurrent. It wasn't consecutive. Concurrent means at the same time. Consecutive means that you fulfill one sentence and then you begin on another sentence.
Well, when do you expect him? When is the earliest you can reasonably expect your husband to be free, back at home with you, and getting care, real care? Beth Haycraft. At
this point, I don't know, because the district attorney from Dyer County had written a note to the parole board in 2000, and I do believe it was 16. Please forgive me, it sort of runs together, recommending Michael for parole. I do know it was the second time that he went up for parole. And even the parole officer had recommended him for parole. And when the decision came back from the parole board, they denied him. And so they said that he needed to go into therapeutic community, which is basically a drug program. Michael has never had a drug charge. But with therapeutic community, there were 3 phases. He was explaining this to me yesterday. And for each phase, these facilities are paid $5,000. So it's a 9-month program. So that's, $15,000 per inmate. So when he was 14 days away from graduation at MCCX, and a counselor, Adam Jinks, who found him out of place, and instead of him giving him a, verbal warning or something, kicked him out of the program. That was what, and then blamed him, and then said that it was refusal to participate, which is it's a Class A write-up, which is the highest write-up that you can get.
Meaning the worst charge, right?
Yes. I mean, somehow refusal to participate in a program in TDOC is the same as if you raped somebody or murdered someone.
This is David Toulis. We're talking with Beth Haycraft about her husband, Michael. He is a man with dissociative identity disorder. He is at Turney Center and Industrial Complex, a slave facility in Only, Tennessee, in the Nashville area. And she does not know when he will be released. He has a serious mental problem, and he's been put in a kind of isolation, though not because he's a bad inmate, but because he's somehow being threatened, and so he has hardly any privileges, no law access, 1 hour outside the cell a day during the week, no time outside a confined cell during the weekend, and okay, so Beth Haycraft, your husband, you don't know when he's coming out, and how do you hear from him? You say there are phone calls made? Well, number one, how much does the phone call, how much do you pay the company to have the phone call per 15-minute segment, let's say? And correspondence, do you get correspondence from your husband? Does he explain his situation? Does he sort of ease his mental anxiety by writing letters to you?
Over the past, probably about the past year, his ability to sit down and focus to write has diminished greatly. That is something that I have noticed. Phone calls can last, actually they can last 30 minutes. I carry 2 phones because I have my personal phone, and then I have a phone that is strictly for him to call. And whatever facility he's transferred to, I have to get a local number. It's about $3 or something per call. If he calls on a local number, it's much more than that. It's anywhere from $5 to $7 if he has to call on my, my regular number, which has a Virginia number.
You're in Saltville, Virginia.
Yeah, I am in Saltville, Virginia.
All right, so you're not getting letters from him. Do you write him every week or every other day? How do you keep in touch?
No, what we're doing primarily is the telephone communication. He's content with that. I also have to be very aware that as far as staff, it's a huge risk that we were taking when we went to the press, but no one else was listening. And these facilities are abusing people, and they, just like any abuser, they don't like to be exposed. And the fear of retaliation, it's not a fear, it's a reality that they do retaliate against inmates. They retaliate against family members. They can withhold phone privileges. They can withhold visitation privileges. The fact that he's 6 hours from me now, that basically, even if I could get there 6 hours, we would have to visit behind, between glass. That's wrong. And it's very harmful to interpersonal relationships. If families have small children, that is very damaging.
And are there small children?
Policies are hurting people.
Are there small children in your household? Do you have children with your husband, Michael, Beth?
No, I don't. He is stepfather of 19. The child is now 19. He was 12 when we married. So he very much misses Michael.
He's not being improved at all by the prison system. The prison system will eject him when finally it frees him, Beth Haycraft, and he will not be better off. Or is there a possibility he might somehow have overcome parts or much of his dissociative identity disorder? Is there any way that could happen just by passage of time, perhaps?
The chances of that are very slim. He needs individual therapy with a skilled therapist who is familiar with dissociative identity disorder. They are out there, but they're sort of rare. With Michael, he needs at least weekly individual therapy, and he is not getting that there. What they do is push medication that does nothing. What it does is basically keep them calm enough to be out of the officer's hands.
This is David Toulis, and we're talking with Beth Haycraft. We are coming into some announcements. We have some great sponsors, and we're going to hear about a crusty old doctor who in 1966 sent a letter to every doctor in Mississippi with a warning. Beth Haycraft, thank you very much for joining us.
Three, two, one.
Chattanooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD4. 92.7 FM's news now.
The Dalton man who was hit by lightning has died. Egan Stanley was celebrating the 4th of July at the Dalton Golf and Country Club when